Hello everyone, Rex Butler here. I'm bringing another lecture on African American Christianity from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary to Central Florida Christian Academy. Today my topic is the Abyssinian Baptist Church of New York City. It's one of the most influential churches anywhere and anytime in the history of America. In 1808, a group of merchants from what is now known as Ethiopia traveled to New York City to ply their trade. One Sunday they attended First Baptist Church, but the ushers seated them in the slave loft and they considered it an insult, and rightly so. In protest, they walked out. Soon afterward, this group of black businessmen purchased property on Worth Street and established the Abyssinian Baptist Church, the first racially integrated Baptist church in the North. From the beginning, the Abyssinian Church appealed to people from all over New York. In the days before bridges, congregants traveled by boat from Brooklyn and New Jersey. Eventually, the leadership of Abyssinian Church enabled their worshipers from Brooklyn to organize their own Concord Baptist Church in 1847. Both these independent black Baptist churches grew rapidly. Let's fast forward to 1930, and the Abyssinian Baptist Church has relocated to Harlem and has become one of the largest congregations of any denomination in America. The pastor was Adam Clayton Powell Sr. Powell was the son of slaves, a Cherokee mother, and an African American father. He was born in Virginia 3 weeks before General Robert E. Lee surrendered and ended the Civil War. His youth was misspent in heavy drinking, gambling, and violence. But during a revival in Renville, Ohio, he experienced a dramatic conversion. When his life changed, he worked his way through school and graduated from Wayland Seminary, Washington, D.C. in 1892. He and his wife, Maddie, had 2 children, Blanche and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. After pastoring churches in Philadelphia and New Haven, Connecticut, Powell was called to Abyssinian Baptist Church in 1908. That was the year of their 100th anniversary. Powell was a fiery revival preacher with a keen intellect and a social vision, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ while opposing racism. All of his endeavors fueled the remarkable growth of Abyssinian Baptist Church, which under his leadership reached a membership of 14,000, an early megachurch. Enter Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a visitor from Germany. Bonhoeffer is neither African nor American, so how does he enter into our picture? Let me explain. To give you a little background about Bonhoeffer, he was born into an intellectual but only nominally Christian family in Breslau. At age 14, Bonhoeffer surprised his family by announcing his intentions to become a theologian. He felt that theology was the best way for him to help people. By 1930, he completed his doctorate in theology and served out an internship in Barcelona, Spain. He decided his next step would be a teaching fellowship at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. When Bonhoeffer came to America, he was dismayed by the watered-down religion that he encountered at Union Seminary and liberal churches. After a time listening to American preachers, he wrote to a friend back home, "In New York, they preach about virtually everything. Only one thing is not addressed, or is addressed so rarely that I have as yet been unable to hear it, namely the gospel of Jesus Christ, the cross, sin and forgiveness, death and life. You see, Bonhoeffer had encountered American theological liberalism. It was described by Richard Niebuhr as a God without wrath, brought men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the ministry of a Christ without a cross. Then a friend invited Bonhoeffer to Abyssinian Baptist Church. There, Bonhoeffer heard a genuine proclamation of the gospel. Not only was Pastor Powell's preaching dynamic and gospel-focused, but also the black gospel music delighted Bonhoeffer, and he formed a lifelong love for spirituals. Bonhoeffer continued to attend Abyssinian Baptist Church and to teach children's Sunday school there. During his year in America, Bonhoeffer learned a significant lesson about the Christian life, one which would benefit all of us in the American church today. The only real piety and power that Bonhoeffer had seen in the American church seemed to be in the churches where there was a present reality and a past history of suffering. Then in 1937, Pastor Powell retired at Abyssinian Baptist Church and passed along the pastorate to his son, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Powell Jr. inherited not only his father's position, but also his activism. He already had led marches, protests, and boycotts to advance the cause of racial equality. In 1944, Powell Jr. was elected as the first African American representative from New York to the United States Congress, and he served as pastor and Congress for most of the rest of his life. Serving in these dual positions, Powell Jr. became the most powerful African American of his time. As congressman, Powell advocated for civil rights through his legislative attempts, although they were largely ignored by his white colleagues. He proposed bills against discrimination in the armed forces, against violence against African Americans, for voting rights, against racial segregation in public institutions, for fair labor laws and equal pay for women. Of his passion for racial activism, he stated, "Civil rights is to me what Israel is to the Jew, or as sacred as Ireland to the Irishman, or Catholicism is to a Catholic." Today, after more than 2 centuries of ministry, the historic Abyssinian Church continues to serve Harlem, New York City, and the world under the leadership of their current pastor, Dr. Calvin Butts. As always, their mission is to win more souls for Christ through evangelism, pastoral care, Christian education, social service delivery, and community development. These ministry goals and its history make the Abyssinian Baptist Church worthy of our attention, and I thank you for letting me to tell the church's story.